A vast strike, as audacious and devastating as it was complex. A remorseless Israeli assault on more than 100 Iranian targets. A blitz on the heart of their nuclear program. Senior soldiers and scientists assassinated, but perished with them, say Iranian media. Their civilian neighbors too. An operation that could ripple through the entire region and shape its near future.
Israel will never allow those who call for our annihilation to develop the means to achieve that goal. Tonight, Israel backs those words with action. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program.
140 miles south of Tehran, and hours after the initial bombing raids, another strike on the Natanz nuclear facility, Iran's main uranium enrichment site. This was an operation a decade in the design, involving more than 200 Israeli jets and, according to Israeli briefings, incursions behind enemy lines, building a drone base inside Iran, smuggling in precision weapons and commandos, all of them unleashed at around 4 a.m. this morning.
The IDF acted quickly and surprised Iran. This is part of the reason that no surface-to-surface missiles have been fired at Israel so far. But we are monitoring Iran, preparing for a response from Iran, knowing that they are preparing to attack.
The dawn aftermath revealed far wider attacks than those last year.
This building where we live blew up. I don't know if they hit it with a missile or what. I don't know what happened to the neighbours.
But bombed-out buildings belie the true strategic cost to the Iranian regime. Among those killed, Hossein Salami, Commander-in-Chief of the Revolutionary Guard, Mohammad Bagheri, Chief of Staff of Iran's armed forces, and 6 of the nation's most senior nuclear scientists. A humiliation not even the fiercest of words could mask.
The Iranian nation and its officials will not remain silent in the face of this crime. The Islamic Republic of Iran's legitimate and powerful response will make the enemy regret its foolish actions.
Sirens over the skies of Amman in Jordan sounded the start of Iran's short-lived reprisals. 100 drones were launched, but all were intercepted and none landed on Israeli soil. The rising threat level, though, enough to ground all planes at Tel Aviv airport and close all airspace above the nation. Shoppers queued in the early hours for supplies, and by midday, streets that should be reverberating with revelers for Tel Aviv pride echoed with silence. This attack, a long-held wish by Israel, forced upon them, they say, by Iranian action.
Israel uncovered clear evidence that the Iranian regime was planning a surprise attack in coordination with their proxies. They had planned to invade from all sides, with thousands of terrorists and thousands of projectiles.
Iran tonight is desperately trying to project strength while images of its weakness are broadcast across the nation, and an entire region waits for the reprisals and wrath born of humiliation.
Well, let's take a closer look at where Israel's initial onslaught hit. The Israel Defense Forces released this map showing some of the targets hit, including nuclear and missile sites, military commanders and nuclear scientists. Many are concentrated in and around Tehran and Tabriz province. Mossad agents are even reported to have built a drone base near Tehran and smuggled weapons systems and precision missiles into Iran to take out its air defences. Among the targets was Iran's main uranium enrichment facility at Natanz, which the IDF says was partially destroyed. The UN's nuclear watchdog said there was no increase in radiation levels, citing the Iranian authorities. It also said Iran's other enrichment site at Fordo had not been hit. Buried deep under a mountain, it's thought Israel would need the US military's help to destroy that facility. Another nuclear site at Isfahan and Bushehr nuclear plant also don't appear to have been targeted yet. Israel's military says Iran launched around 100 drones at its territory, many of which were intercepted, some by Jordan. Here's our international editor, Lindsay Hilson.
They couldn't believe their eyes. Then there was another explosion. And another. The smoke over the northwestern city of Tabriz could be seen for miles. An airbase and a missile fuel depot were hit, one of dozens of targets across the country. In Kermanshah, a man shouts, "Right now, Israel has attacked us with a missile." An underground missile facility was the target. The attacks aimed at destroying much of Iran's conventional military capacity. In other words, its ability to retaliate. No one in Tehran slept much last night. We've disguised the voices of eyewitnesses to protect their identities.
The windows of my home were shaking, and that's when I realized it must be a missile strike of some kind or a bombing. I was in a state of panic. I grabbed my phone, opened social media. Soon I found out that an Israeli attack was underway in Tehran, and the areas being hit were residential places of my loved ones. I was overwhelmed with worry.
Iranian media says more than 70 people were killed and 300 plus injured. Those who want regime change nonetheless welcomed the attacks.
Nobody is upset. Even my religious friends and those who wear hijab are happy because they believe that this regime must end at some point. And this regime is playing with us. Everyone is happy because this is a serious attack which may even target the head of the snake. Nobody around me is scared.
An unremarkable neighborhood, but this was where Major General Hossein Salami, the commander-in-chief of the Revolutionary Guard, lived. It's hard to believe that he didn't know that Mossad has penetrated the Iranian security services and hadn't heard the threats, but he was at home nonetheless. Ali Shamkhani, one of the most powerful advisors to the supreme leader, was either killed or injured. It's not yet clear which. He was also at home in Tehran, heedless of the danger. The commander of the infamous Quds force, Ismail Khani, is also reported dead. The entire chain of command wiped out. Leaders across the world fear Israel's aim was to scupper talks between the US and Iran.
I call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint to avoid further escalation. I reiterate that any military action that jeopardizes the safety and security of nuclear facilities risks grave consequences for the people of Iran, the region, and beyond.
The Iranian regime brought supporters out onto the streets of Tehran today for formulaic protests. But with Hezbollah and other regional proxies seriously weakened by previous Israeli attacks, the Islamic Republic is more vulnerable than ever before, not least because much of its own population is impoverished by sanctions and desperate for change.
Well, earlier I spoke to Israel's former ambassador to Germany, Jeremy Issacharoff. He was also a senior official in Israel focused on Iran's nuclear program. And I asked him whether this attack defied Donald Trump.
In terms of the coordination with the Americans, I think I would say that the Americans and the Israelis are talking at a very high level every day on an authoritative level, and I don't think there's any daylight between them. And I think, look, when you're having a negotiation with the Iranians, it's always important to have a credible military option that can back the diplomacy. So in my opinion, Israel will use these events on the ground, and obviously we'll see how the events evolve over the next few days, to actually bring Iran to recognition that it should desist and stop its nuclear program and undertake not to produce nuclear weapons in a clear and verifiable way.
Isn't it very unrealistic, though, to think that you can get away with killing military chiefs and civilians and not draw a military response from Iran? They will have to hit back for their own credibility.
I will not, first of all, I would prefer that they wouldn't hit back, but I think in all honesty, there's a very high chance they will examine their options and they will respond to Israel, but they should take into account that they're very highly vulnerable, that Israeli military operations have been far more successful and far more penetrating than what Iran has been able to do to Israel.
I mean, ultimately, though, does Israel have the weaponry it needs to actually take out Iranian underground facilities? It would need the deeper bunker busters that America has. So, I mean, the threat to take out their facilities can't currently be delivered, can it?
Today's events have shown a very, very high degree of capability, not just of the Israeli Air Force, but regarding reports of various intelligence groups working inside Iran and defeating the air defense systems.
So, if the ultimate aim is...
I would take some caution in terms of what can be done still. I would.
But if you're right about the ultimate aim being diplomatic, I mean, you've dealt with this whole area when you were in the ministry. Do you think you can actually do a deal with the Iranians?
I think before the events of today, the Iranian nuclear program has never been as advanced as it is at this point. They've enriched uranium at the level of 60%, which is a very short step to weapons-grade uranium. And they've done so to the amount of enough uranium that could maybe be good for 9 to 10 atomic weapons.
And of course, some of Israel's critics will say, well, look, you've got nuclear weapons. Why shouldn't they as well? Neither of you intend to use them.
Well, first of all, the head of the Iranians' supreme leader says in May that Israel is a cancerous tumor and must be eliminated. You know. It's rhetoric, but you know what? In Israel, we kind of tend, after the 7th of October, when somebody says they're going to try and destroy, you know, Israel, Israelis, peaceful communities, we begin to tend to believe them. And from that point of view, I think, you know, Iran has shown that it has used Hamas, it's used Hezbollah, it's used Islamic Jihad, it's used the Houthis as proxies in order to put a ring of fire around Israel. And so it's not just words. These are actions that are very palpable that have cost many Israeli lives. And so from that point of view, we take them very seriously at what they're saying.
Ambassador, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, in the last few minutes, Israel says it had detected around 100 missiles launched from Iran towards Israeli territory. Sirens are sounding, warning residents to get into protected shelters. Let's get the latest from our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy, who is outside the White House. Siobhan, what's been the response there?
Well, the president has been meeting with his cabinet in the Situation Room, Christian. We know that that meeting has now finished, but we are waiting for a readout of that meeting. But in the meantime, the president has been seeking, at least, to make clear in various interviews that he's given today that he knew, the US knew exactly what was about to happen last night. And he's even confirmed that US weapons were used in the attack by Israel. But what's really striking, I think, is a difference in tone today compared to the tone last night as the attacks were unfolding, when the White House issued a statement on behalf of the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, which was unusual in as much as it did not include the standard US line that America stands unequivocally by Israel, one of its closest allies. That was unusual. Instead, Rubio sought to distance the US from the attack, saying that Israel had acted unilaterally. And now, Christian, contrast that with a rather bellicose sounding President Trump today in his social media posts. In one, he said that he had given Iran a 60-day ultimatum, he said, to make a deal. And today is day 61. I told them, he said, what to do, but they just couldn't get there. In another, he also stressed that Israel has, and I quote, a lot of America's lethal military equipment, and that the next attacks, he said, would be even more brutal. And now either President Trump is trying to save face, because as recently as yesterday, he was on the record as saying that he was trying President Netanyahu not to attack Iran while the US was still in nuclear negotiations with Tehran. But clearly Netanyahu has ignored that and gone ahead anyway. Just listen to the exact words of the president yesterday.
we're fairly close to an agreement. We are fairly close to a pretty good agreement. It's got to be better than pretty good, though, but it's got to be, I'd much prefer an agreement. As long as I think there is an agreement, I don't want them going in because I think that would blow it. Might help it, actually, but it also could blow it. But we've had very good discussions with Iran. Whether or not we get there, I can't tell you, but it'll happen soon. I say this, Peter, very strongly. They can't have, whether it's going in or not going in, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I'd prefer the more friendly.
Well, I think it's clear that whatever his reservations were yesterday, today the president has a different view. And in his words, he now deems the attack to have been very successful. And I think quite simply, he's trying to gain some credit for himself and for the United States as part of the plan.
Well, the talks finished, or could they be salvaged?
Well, certainly President Trump wants to salvage the talks. In one of his posts today, he said, rather ominously, Iran must make a deal before there is nothing left. Now, his special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, was due to hold the next round of negotiations in Oman on Sunday, but Iran has now withdrawn from those talks. Clearly, it sees the US as being complicit as part of the plan. But Trump is clearly hoping, isn't he, that the attack will somehow force Iran to the table. Now, whether that happens or not is still not clear. But what is clear here, Christian, the big picture is that President Trump campaigned on being a president for peace, for the end of wars. And yet here he is clearly, seemingly about to get the US embroiled in yet another one.
Siobhan Kennedy in Washington. Well, there are live pictures now coming in from Tel Aviv showing some smoke across the city. It's not clear if that is from missiles from Iran or intercepted devices. But joining us now from Tehran, the Iranian capital, Mohammad Marandi. He's a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiating team. Professor, I know you don't speak for the government, but you have close contacts with it. There have been missiles fired from Iran. Do you believe, given civilians as well as generals and scientists were killed in Iran, that Iran intends to kill Israeli civilians?
I don't think Iran intends to kill civilians. That's something that the Israelis do. The Israelis are the ones who consider everyone to be Amalek and subhuman. They are, after all, the chosen people. So that's not what we do. I think that such language is totally inaccurate, and it only helps the Israelis continue with their genocidal behavior. The Iranians are retaliating.
So what is the aim now?
If civilians are killed, well, when the Israelis strike Tehran, the Iranians are going to strike Tel Aviv, and Iran has much better capabilities than the Israelis do when it comes to striking with missiles, and the Israeli regime will soon see that.
That's not what history suggests, though, is it? I mean, last time this happened, the Israeli airstrikes were widely understood to be more successful than the Iranian ones. So the question is, what can Iran achieve this time round?
No, I don't think that's accurate. The Israeli airstrikes, if they were successful last time round, the Israeli regime would have continued striking Iran. If they had taken out Iran's air defenses, they would have continued with the strikes. The reason why they didn't continue is because they didn't succeed back then. And so it's not as if the Israeli regime has feelings for anyone. If they saw an opening, they would use that. But we have to remember that this war of aggression was carried out, initiated by the Israeli regime, unprovoked. Iran's nuclear targets, nuclear sites, which IAEA inspectors visit there regularly, they were struck. Buildings near my home, where I'm sitting right now, were destroyed, killing civilians. Literally, I don't know in a direct line if it would be a kilometer or not. In different neighborhoods in Tehran, they've destroyed buildings. Children were thrown out of buildings, just like in Gaza when you see the footage, and in Lebanon when the Israelis would strike. Children were thrown out of buildings, murdered, women murdered, families of targets murdered, neighbors murdered.
And
That's
how
how
much
the Israeli
damage
regime
has been done to Iran's nuclear program? which the IAEA said was not in compliance with their rules?
No, the IAEA board of directors is a political entity. It's dominated by the West, like all international institutions that were created post-Second World War. And the countries that voted against Iran are predominantly Western, and those that didn't vote against Iran are predominantly global South, and population-wise, the vast majority, like China, India, Russia.
But how much damage has been done?
So Iran's key assets, whether it's military or nuclear, are deep underground, and therefore they cannot be touched by the Israeli regime. They can strike buildings on the surface, on the land, but they can't touch underground installations. But we have always keep in mind, these installations are regularly visited. The IAEA inspectors regularly go there. And Netanyahu has been saying for, someone just reminded me today, over 40 years, I'm told, that Iran is on the verge of making nuclear weapons. These are lies that he repeats, and lies that Western media repeat, and lies that Western politicians repeat, because they will support the Israeli regime no matter what atrocity it carries out, as we've seen in Gaza with the Holocaust.
Do you think the process of talks and negotiation can be rescued? I mean, the Americans and the Israelis are suggesting that the real aim is to bomb Iran into agreeing to come back into compliance. Do you think that talks process can be resuscitated?
No, I think it's going to be almost impossible to have talks or an agreement with Americans in the future. Trump has shown himself to be dishonest. Just yesterday, he said one thing. Today on social media, saying something else. At the negotiating table, he and Witkoff one day say something, then the next day they say something else. He has agreements like the ceasefire in Gaza, which Witkoff negotiated, and then he goes and says the Palestinians must leave. The U.S. is the guarantor for the ceasefire in Lebanon, but then the Israelis are daily, on a regular basis, murdering Lebanese citizens, and the guarantor, meaning the United States and the Europeans, do nothing about it. The United States is untrustworthy, and it's not just our region, it's with the trade negotiations, it's with Russia, it's with across the board. Trump is simply unreliable, and his White House is unreliable. But now they have murdered Iranians, they have murdered women and children. I know that in the West that's not important because we are Amalek just like the Gazans. But for us, it's very important. And we will make sure that the Israeli regime pays the price. And hopefully Trump is sane enough not to enter a military conflict with Iran. But have no doubt that it will be much easier for Iran to strike targets across the Persian Gulf. Much closer, many more drones and missiles can hit these targets. These are all glass palaces. Those family dictatorships that host American bases, they will be seen as complicit. So if we don't want to see the global economy collapse, it's best to force Trump not to do anything stupid.
Mohammed Morandi, thank you very much for joining us. Well, those pictures are an apparent missile strike in Tel Aviv, but so far there are no reported casualties. Here, the Prime Minister has spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu, urging the need for a diplomatic solution, whilst the Foreign Secretary warned that it was a moment of grave peril in the Middle East. Our reporter Jane Deeth is in Westminster. Jane.
Yes, he has spoken to the Israeli leader, and we're hearing it's being reported that in the last hour he's also spoken to Donald Trump and re-emphasised that same argument, the importance, in his words, of de-escalating this conflict. When he spoke to Mr. Netanyahu, Keir Starmer agreed that Israel has the right to defend itself and shared grave concerns about Iran's nuclear program. But he told Mr. Netanyahu both sides need to step back from this crisis now. There has to be a diplomatic solution for the sake of the stability of the entire region. Also this evening, the Foreign Secretary David Lammy has been speaking to reporters. He said he'd been talking to the other side, the Iranians.
I spoke to my Iranian counterpart today to urge restraint at this time and calm. I recognise that this is a moment of grave peril in the Middle East. All of us recognise Israel's right to protect citizens at this time and its security. We have long been concerned about Iran's nuclear ambitions.
So that's the UK political reaction so far. The question is, will there be military action? Last year, the UK did step in to help defend Israel against Iranian drones, RAF Typhoons shooting down several drones. But asked today, neither the Prime Minister nor the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, would be drawn on whether this time, in this crisis, the UK would be stepping in to help defend Israel against what seems to be tonight unfolding and escalating Iranian retaliation.
Jane Deeth in Westminster. Well, let's return to the situation in Tel Aviv, where at least one Iranian missile is understood to have hit. Our correspondent Paul McNamara joins us from there. Paul, what's happening?
Hi there. Look, as soon as we left you about 20 minutes ago, the air raid sirens started going off, and within a minute or two, we started seeing rockets being fired, coming from all different directions, actually. At first, it was just a few out in the distance from the south. It looked like from out to sea. And then we started seeing rockets coming from the north of the city, above the city skyline. Within a few minutes, the sky was pretty full. You could start hearing the puffs in the sky. And then that's when we saw, maybe 5 minutes later, the rockets actually come down and land somewhere in the city. Sort of smoke start to rise. We understand from sources that rockets fell in about 5 to 7 locations. We also understand at the moment there are reports of one minor injury. It has to be said, from all the rockets that went up, it was only a very small amount. We saw one landing. So clearly the Iron Dome is working well, but it just goes to underline the pressure that Israel is now under. It started something in the early hours of this morning. Benjamin Netanyahu warned this afternoon that there will be retaliation, perhaps waves of retaliation. They have now started.
Paul McNamara in Tel Aviv, and it's worth reminding ourselves that Israel is unique in many ways with its cities, and that not only does it have those missile defenses, but almost every citizen in that country has access to a bomb shelter. So it's unlikely that many people will have been exposed to those explosions that we just saw, but we are awaiting reports on exactly what damage has been done and if there are injuries.